At 39, Darian Vale had perfected the art of making an entire room fall silent without raising his voice. As the ruthless chief executive of Vale Meridian, he was known for his immaculate suits, merciless negotiations, and refusal to tolerate excuses. His employees called him the Frost King behind closed doors, because compassion seemed to have vanished from him years ago. That morning, however, Darian's carefully controlled world collided with someone who had never learned to be intimidated. Elena Marlowe, a 23-year-old nursing intern, hurried through the hospital corridor carrying a tray of medication when she saw an elderly patient being pushed away from the emergency desk. "Your paperwork isn't complete," an administrator snapped. "Come back when it is." The old man's hands trembled around the edge of his wheelchair. Elena stopped. "He needs treatment now." The administrator glared at her. "You're an intern. Go back to your ward." Then Darian appeared. Conversation died instantly. Elena recognized him from photographs, but instead of stepping aside, she looked from him to the frightened patient. "Sir," she said carefully, "if this man leaves, something could happen to him." Darian's expression hardened. "You're interrupting a hospital administrator." "I know. You're also interrupting me." Elena tightened her grip on the medication tray. "Then I'm sorry. But someone has to." A few nurses looked away, expecting her to be dismissed. Darian studied her for several seconds. Most people feared disappointing him. Elena seemed more afraid of failing the patient. "Admit him," Darian ordered. The administrator blinked. "But his insurance." "I said admit him." The wheelchair disappeared through the emergency doors. Elena exhaled, unaware that Darian was still watching her. "You could have lost your internship," he said. She met his eyes. "Maybe. But at least I wouldn't have lost my conscience." For the first time that morning, something unfamiliar stirred behind Darian's cold expression. Not anger. Respect. He walked away without another word. Elena returned to her duties, believing the encounter was over. It wasn't. By lunchtime, a supervisor summoned her to the administration office. The medication tray she had carried earlier had been reported as improperly logged, and the administrator accused her of negligence. Elena immediately understood. Someone wanted her punished for speaking up. "I checked every entry twice," she insisted. The administrator slid the report across the desk. "Then perhaps you should have checked a third time." Elena's face burned with humiliation. Before she could answer, the door opened. Darian entered. He picked up the report, scanned it once, and looked toward the administrator. "Who authorized this accusation?" The room went still. "No one," the administrator stammered. "I was simply handling the matter." Darian placed the report back on the desk. "Then handle this instead." He pointed toward the falsified timestamp hidden near the bottom of the page. This document was altered after Elena submitted her record. The administrator's face drained of color. Elena stared at Darian. "How did you notice that?" His gaze settled on her. "Because unlike everyone else in this building, you actually checked the details." He turned toward the door, then paused. "And Elena?" "Yes. Don't let cruel people convince you that kindness makes you weak." Then he left. Elena watched him disappear down the corridor, wondering why the coldest man she had ever met had just become the first person to stand between her and injustice. And somewhere behind Darian's carefully locked heart, he was asking himself the same question. Darian Vale had spent years believing that kindness was a weakness people exploited, yet Elena Marlowe had begun dismantling that belief without even trying. He noticed her everywhere now, not because he followed her, but because she was impossible to overlook. She stayed beside frightened patients after her shifts ended, carried meals to those who could not afford them, and defended junior nurses whenever senior staff treated them unfairly. She never sought praise, which made Darian notice her even more. One evening, he found her sitting beside an elderly patient whose family had not arrived. "You're still here," he said. Elena looked up from the book in her lap. She was frightened. "That's not your responsibility after your shift." "No," she replied softly. "But she's still frightened." Darian had no answer. The patient eventually fell asleep, and Elena quietly covered her with a blanket. Darian watched the gesture with an unfamiliar ache in his chest. "You make everything unnecessarily difficult," he said. Elena smiled. "You mean unnecessarily human." Before he could respond, an alarm sounded from the emergency ward. A young patient had collapsed. Elena immediately rushed inside. Darian followed, remaining behind the medical team as they worked. Elena's hands stayed steady despite the panic surrounding her. She assisted the nurses, followed instructions, and refused to leave until the child was stabilized. When the crisis ended, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Darian noticed her hands trembling. "You were scared." "Of course I was. You didn't show it." "Being afraid doesn't mean you stop helping." The words struck him harder than she could have known. Years earlier, Darian had watched his younger brother die after a private clinic refused urgent treatment until payment was guaranteed. Since that night, he had treated compassion as a dangerous illusion and built his career around control. Elena had just challenged that entire philosophy with one sentence. The next morning, Darian summoned the hospital board. He ordered an emergency fund created for patients who could not afford immediate treatment. No executive received credit for the decision. Instead, Darian instructed the board to announce only that the policy existed. When Elena discovered what had happened, she confronted him. "You did this because of what happened yesterday." "I did it because the system was wrong." "And you changed it?" "Yes." "Why?" Darian looked through the glass wall toward the emergency department. "Because you made it difficult for me to ignore." For once, Elena saw something beneath his icy composure. "Pain." Before she could respond, Darian's phone rang. His expression changed as he listened. A corporate rival had obtained confidential hospital records and was preparing to expose the facility to a scandal that could destroy Darian's company and place several employees under investigation. Then the caller added something worse. One of the leaked files carried Elena's identification number. Darian's jaw tightened. "This isn't about the company," he said. Elena stared at him. "What is it about?" He looked directly at her. "Someone is trying to make you take the blame." The warmth vanished from the room. For the first time, Elena understood that the danger surrounding Darian's empire had reached her. And Darian understood something even more frightening. Whoever had started the attack knew exactly which person he would risk everything to protect. The accusation spread through the hospital before Elena could defend herself. Whispers followed her through the corridors, colleagues avoided her eyes, and the administrator who had once tried to humiliate her suddenly appeared eager to cooperate with investigators. Elena refused to resign. "I didn't falsify anything," she told Darian. "I know." "You can't know." Darian placed a folder on the table between them. "I checked." Inside were security records, access logs, and copies of the original hospital files. Someone had altered Elena's records from a terminal that only senior administrators could access. Elena stared at the evidence. "Then why hasn't anyone arrested them?" "Because they're not finished." Darian's voice was colder than she had ever heard it. "They want me to react before I understand the entire scheme." That evening, Darian ordered additional security around the hospital. Elena objected, but he refused to compromise. "You're treating me like I'm helpless." "No," he replied. "I'm treating you like someone who's being targeted." Their argument ended when the hospital lights suddenly went out. Emergency generators flickered to life seconds later. Then someone screamed. A patient transport elevator had stopped between floors. Elena ran toward it. Darian followed. The elevator doors were jammed, and an elderly patient was trapped inside with a frightened nurse. Elena immediately began speaking through the gap, keeping them calm while Darian contacted emergency personnel. When the doors finally opened, Elena climbed inside before anyone could stop her. The patient was struggling to breathe. She stabilized him until the medical team arrived. Darian watched from the corridor, realizing that courage was not something Elena displayed occasionally. It was simply who she was. Then he noticed something on the elevator floor. A small metal access card. It belonged to the same administrator who had falsified Elena's records. Darian picked it up. "This is the evidence we needed." But before they could act, the administrator disappeared. Hours later, investigators discovered that the sabotage had been coordinated with Darian's business rival, who intended to force Darian into selling his company at a fraction of its value. There was only one problem. The rival had underestimated Darian's willingness to sacrifice his fortune. At the emergency board meeting, Darian pushed a folder across the table. "I will not sell." His directors protested. The company could collapse. Thousands of jobs were at risk. Darian remained calm. Then let it collapse honestly rather than survive by sacrificing innocent people. Elena heard about his decision and confronted him afterward. "You're risking everything." "I know." "Why?" Darian looked at her for a long moment. "Because somewhere along the way, I became tired of winning things that weren't worth having." Her expression softened. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Elena reached for his hand. It was a simple gesture, but Darian held it as though it were something precious. Their feelings had become impossible to deny, yet both understood the boundary between professional authority and personal emotion. They agreed that nothing romantic would begin until Elena's internship was completely finished and there could be no question of pressure or favoritism. Days later, Elena completed her final shift. She walked out of the hospital carrying the small box containing her internship badge and watched the doors close behind her. Darian was waiting across the street. Not as her employer. Not as her superior. Just Darian. "I suppose," Elena said, smiling, "you finally have no reason to order me around." He smiled back. "That's unfortunate." She laughed. Then a black vehicle screeched to a halt at the curb. Two masked men jumped out. One grabbed Elena. Darian lunged forward. The struggle lasted only seconds before the vehicle disappeared into traffic. Darian stood frozen in the street, Elena's abandoned bag at his feet. His phone rang. A distorted voice spoke one sentence. "If you want her alive, bring us the company." Darian closed his eyes. For the first time in decades, the Frost King felt genuine fear. Then he opened them again, and the fear was gone. What remained was determination. Darian did not call the police first. He called the one investigator he trusted, sent every piece of evidence he had collected, and ordered his security team to trace the vehicle without confronting the kidnappers prematurely. The ransom demand was designed to make him surrender his company, but Darian recognized the deeper strategy. They wanted him desperate enough to make a mistake. Meanwhile, Elena was being held in an abandoned warehouse outside the city. Her captors expected panic. Instead, she studied them. One man had a badly injured hand. Another kept checking the locked door. Their leader repeatedly mentioned a shipment scheduled for midnight. Elena realized they were frightened too. When the injured man began bleeding through his bandage, she quietly offered medical assistance. "You expect me to help you?" he asked. "I expect you to stop making your injury worse." He hesitated before allowing her to treat his hand. That small act of kindness changed everything. While Elena worked, she noticed a distinctive mark on a shipping crate and remembered seeing the same company name in one of Darian's investigation files. She understood where they were. The warehouse belonged to the rival company. She waited until the injured guard left and whispered the location to another captive, who had access to a damaged phone. The message reached Darian. Within minutes, police surrounded the building. The kidnappers realized they had been discovered and started a fire. Smoke poured through the warehouse. Elena helped the other captive toward an exit, but a falling beam blocked the final passage. Then Darian appeared through the smoke. "Elena!" She turned. He rushed toward her. "Go!" she shouted. "Not without you." A second beam crashed behind him. Darian pushed Elena toward the exit, but the floor beneath him gave way. He fell hard. Elena grabbed his hand. "Let go." "No. You'll fall too. Then we'll fall together." With the firefighters closing in, Elena pulled with everything she had. Darian found a ledge beneath him, and together they escaped moments before part of the warehouse collapsed. Outside, Elena was wrapped in a rescue blanket while Darian refused medical attention until he knew she was safe. "You're bleeding," she told him. "So are you. I'm a nurse. I can handle it. And I'm stubborn. I noticed." For the first time since the kidnapping began, they laughed. The investigation that followed exposed the entire conspiracy. The administrator who had framed Elena had accepted money to falsify hospital records, while Darian's rival had orchestrated the sabotage and kidnapping to seize control of the company. But Darian surprised everyone at the final board meeting. He announced that he was stepping down as CEO. Elena stared at him when she heard. "You're really giving it all up?" "I spent years building an empire because I was terrified of losing control." He looked toward the hospital. "Now I know what actually matters." Months later, the abandoned warehouse was demolished. In its place stood a new community medical center funded by Darian's remaining fortune. The surprise came on opening day. Darian had named the center after neither himself nor Elena. Instead, its sign read, "The Second Chance Center." Elena looked at him in confusion. "Why that name?" "Because everyone deserves one." She smiled. Then Darian handed her a set of keys. "What are these?" "The clinic's yours." Her eyes widened. "You're giving me a clinic?" "I'm asking you to run it." She laughed through sudden tears. "And what will you do?" Darian smiled. "For the first time in my life, something useful." He stepped beside her as the doors opened. Former patients, nurses, rescuers, and families they had helped filled the entrance with applause. Elena looked around at the people who had once needed saving and realized the greatest rescue had not been from the warehouse. It had been Darian rescuing himself from the cold life he had built. He took her hand. "I thought love would make me weak," he whispered. Elena squeezed his fingers. "It made you human." The Frost King smiled. And together, they walked into the future, not with an empire behind them, but with a life they had finally chosen for themselves.